And recording, cool. Hello, Isabel.
Hi.
Welcome. Thank you so much for joining me on this call. This is our free webinar about bread and the health of the planet. This is, I think, our fifth person we've now spoken to through this platform. And yeah, the idea is that we want to talk to experts in their field about sustainability and about their expertise, and provide people who are listening in a chance to sort of ask some questions as well. So those of you who are listening in live, we've got that Q&A box in there. Just jump into that feature, click the little button down the bottom. I'm pretty sure everyone knows how to use Zoom now, but the little button down the bottom there, Q&A, click that, type your message, and we will do our best to answer those. I've got a bunch of questions I want to talk to Isabel about anyway, but yeah, like the whole point of tuning in live is you get to be part of the conversation and you get to ask her some questions. So, hey, without further ado, Isabel, I'd love it if you just introduce yourself and just tell us a bit about how you got to here, because I've introduced you on the invite to this as I've touched on you being German and that you were a microbiologist and that you started up a bakery. So can you fill in the gaps for me, please?
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks for having me. And yeah, so my background is in microbiology, but I have always sort of had quite a political, I came to have quite a political view on the world at quite a young age. So I was 13 when the Berlin Wall fell.
Wow.
And that was the end of communism, and then obviously the two halves of Germany sort of joined, and there was the former communists and the western half. And I think I sort of tried to understand what was going on there, and I felt very keenly, as probably a lot of teenagers do, that the ideas of communism and sort of, equal rights and equal resources for all were actually not that bad. And I thought and it coincided also, I guess, shortly afterwards with the Iraq War, which there were huge protests in Germany. And sort of as a young teenager, I felt that it wasn't quite so clear cut that the West should have won. And I guess I started questioning that narrative at quite a young age, and got quite political, and then kind of felt that the political sort of groups I was interested in and I was getting involved in, it wasn't really for me. They were quite dogmatic, like the leftist groups were quite dogmatic, and some of the stuff just outright didn't make any sense to me. It was just...
So were you in like a group or a party or a...
Yeah, no, I wasn't in a party. I just went to demonstrations and, against the Iraq War and against various other things, and sort of, I wasn't in any organization. I just sort of got involved with a few people and sort of went to a few meetings and discussions. And
Yeah, wow.
I thought, we're going to change the world. And then I was like, what are these people on about? It just, it just didn't make sense to me. And then I became really interested in science, and I felt like I just didn't know enough about the world to be able to make judgments and calls, and that I just really wanted to understand the world better, to be able to see if there was really anything, how we could change things. And I felt that just talking about it and making some outrageous claims that you didn't have to disprove, like what it seemed to me a lot of those political groups were doing, wasn't really gonna, no wonder that I felt that was maybe, the fault of communism or the left or something, that they made like these outrageous claims that weren't really founded in anything, and therefore they couldn't hold up against, capitalism. But I had this keen feeling that there was something wrong with the system that had won. So I went into science, and I got really interested in science and really enjoyed it, and that's what brought me to New Zealand. I came to study microbiology and marine biology here in New Zealand, and really enjoyed it. And then after my master's here, I went back to Germany to do a PhD, and sort of halfway through came to the realization that maybe I wasn't really the scientist. Maybe I really wanted to, I was still really interested in changing something about the world, and that by focusing on some minute, tiny little problem and becoming an absolute expert in some scientific problem wasn't really the best use of my time. So I dropped my PhD and I did journalism and focused sort of on science communication. So I felt, well, you know, if only we can communicate better the real findings of science, maybe there's an impact, you know, how we can improve the world. And I guess I would have probably stuck with that if I'd stayed in Germany, but then my husband and I had kids, got married, and decided to move back to New Zealand. And I felt that science journalism was quite niche already in Germany, and that in New Zealand there just wasn't going to be any prospects for me. And so I thought, oh, okay, what else can I do? And I've always been really fond of baking, and I love bread, and that was pretty much the only thing I had missed in the 2 years that I'd lived in New Zealand beforehand. So I thought, hey, I'll just do the typical immigrant thing. I'll bring my food and, you know, make good bread. And actually, I can combine a lot of my actual passions, the knowledge from the microbiology studies that I had done, the knowledge about organics and you know, better agricultural systems and how they contribute to our health and how they can contribute to the planet's health, and how all that is interlinked with the food system. And you know, by trying to actually actively do something rather than just talk about it and write about it, by actually making a product that can contribute to a better system. I thought maybe that's the way to go, and that's what I'm still doing.
Fantastic. There's a few things I want to unpick in all of that. One of the things I want to go back to first is just a quick definition of what is microbiology. What does a microbiologist do? I know.
Microbiology is the study of bacteria and archaea, which are even ancient, more distant form of life. So single cellular organisms that are thought to be the first life forms on the planet.
And so, and so your education in that was what, looking at how they live, how they
well, I mean,
survive, how they
for a very long time consisted of, you know, you take a sample and you dilute it down until you've got one single cell, and then you grow that in a medium to a pure culture, and then you can study that culture, because bacteria are so minute and so tiny that you can't study a single one. You have to, like, to be able to say something about their metabolism and what they do, you kind of have to have a pure culture. And that's for the longest part, that was how microbiology was done. And microbiologists were keenly aware that they can only grow a very, very, very tiny fraction of the bacteria that are out there in the lab. They just couldn't grow the other ones because a lot of bacteria depend on interactions with other bacteria. And if you don't know anything about a bacteria, what it actually does, and you don't create the right environment for it in your flask or on your petri dish or something, it just won't grow. So you can't study it. And when I got into microbiology, I came to New Zealand, and I thought, oh, I want to do something out on the sea. I love the sea. I love the ocean, and I come from a more or less landlocked country, or at least where I've grown up. So, but I've always loved the sea. So I was actively looking for somebody who did marine microbiology, and I found somebody at the University of Auckland who did exactly that. And I just basically liked the professor and said, I've got money for research. Do you want to do this? And I said, yeah, I do. So I didn't have much of a plan, but I really liked it. And he was really young and innovative. And then the other supervisor I got was a female professor, and she was more the microbiology part. And she had gotten a huge grant to use DNA technology to study bacteria rather than plate counting and that. And that was, at the time, probably one of the first ones. This was like 99, 2000, one of the first labs to start working with this technique. And it was still hugely expensive, but using DNA technology has the advantage that you can kind of take like a snapshot. You're just looking at what DNA is there, and then you can compare the DNA to other DNA that is already on the data websites, and so you can see what your groups of bacteria in your sample in situ, so in the environment, actually are. And you're not depending on taking something and growing it, by which you know, that's very selective and it doesn't give you the real picture. The other one is more like taking a real picture. So that's what we did, and we looked at bacteria in the gut of fish, because we wanted, or the supervisor wanted to prove that fish that actually only live on algae, which at the time was sort of deemed not to be possible for fish to live on a low calorie diet like algae, and that to be possible, they would have to kind of help them digest and extract energy from the algae.
Hey, Isabel, we're just having... Isabel,
No,
you having...
lost you.
Yeah, just having an issue with your connection. You've got frozen.
Oh my God, I think maybe. Me? You're really wobbly.
I am as well, am I? Bear with us, folks. Okay, she's gone. Just me. Hopefully she joins back in. Maybe, I don't know, children at her place jumping online. Just blame the kids. That's what I do these days now that I've just had a new child. Just blame the child. Well, I've got the audience, those of you still here listening. There are other, or all the other webinars we've done so far up on our page. Oh, there you go. I'll just finish this off as well. If you go to gowellconsulting.co.nz/resources, and then scroll down to the bottom, you'll see all the other videos we've put up there. If you'd like to listen to other conversations we've had. Anyway, back to you, Isabel. You're back here. Can you hear me? Yeah. See me all right? I was blaming your children while you were gone. Was it the kids jumping on?
I think you're possibly right.
Okay.
I was just thinking the same thing. they probably were jumping on and playing video games. Yep.
Cool. Hey, well, so where I lost you was talking about the marine microbiology, and that you were looking at the guts of fish, and that they're thinking, carry on from there. Basically lost you about, you're talking about learning about their diets.
Yeah, so we were trying to learn about the fish, what they were eating, and we're trying to sort of map the bacteria, and using this DNA technology gave us a much broader picture of what actually goes on. And for me, what was really interesting was, because there was nothing on fish, I had to study like all these other gut bacteria papers that were out there. So they were mostly on ruminants and on humans. So I got quite a good understanding of how gut digestion and fermentation and that works.
Yes.
Can you still hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh no, looks like we're frozen again.
Yeah, you're a little bit frozen at your end still. Them pesky kids on the games.
I can hear you again. Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, I can hear you. You're still going. It kind of just. But the other thing we could potentially do, Isabel, is maybe just cut the video. So if we'll see how we go. But if it happens again, maybe we just cut the video. That'll be less.
Saying it's my internet connection, so I do suspect it is my children.
Yeah.
But let's hope they got the message now.
So that's starting to be a nice segue in towards bread, right? So,
yeah, and that's what I sort of keep coming back to in the work that I do now, that understanding how digestion in the gut works, and how important bacteria are, and how important fiber is, and how bad chemicals, food, agricultural chemicals, food additives, and all of that are for the bacteria in our gut, and antibiotics and all sorts of things, you know, preservatives, and that these are all, especially antibiotics and preservatives, are obviously designed to kill bacteria. So having them in food is really, it does affect our digestion, and that's why I always say it's really important to read labels and to avoid chemicals in food as much as possible.
yes.
And for me, bread is sort of, it's a wonderful food because it's one of the oldest foods that humans have produced as a food, you know, where we just haven't hunted and killed or thrown something in water and boiled it, but actually came up with a process of fermentation, most likely by chance, but recognized that that produced a nutritionally superior product, and have refined that process. And that's, you know, about 10,000 years ago, and it goes hand in hand with agriculture and the start of complex human civilizations. And bread is sort of almost central to most human cultures in some way or form, with maybe the exception of the Eastern Asian cultures, which are more focused on rice. But where wheat was grown in most of, you know, Africa, Asia, Europe, some form of grain culture existed, and they all had bread as a very essential part of their diet. And that's because bread is, you know, it's very simple. You only need grains and water and a little bit of salt. But the process of fermentation, and that's again where bacteria come into it, from sourdough, converts the nutrients in the grain into something more nutritious than they are if you just take them on their own.
Can you talk to that in a bit more detail in terms of, and maybe just a quick tip for those listening? So, Isabel's Bakery makes, is it only sourdough bread? Only?
No.
But predominantly.
Our core range is sourdough bread, but we are a wholesale bakery, so we sell a lot to hospitality. And as much as I would like people to use more sourdough, obviously, mainly hospitality, you know, caters to the mainstream mainly. So there's a lot of white fluff, as I call it.
So can you talk to us then in a bit more detail about the sourdough process and that fermentation and what's going on? Because you've talked to me about it before, and I haven't eaten normal bread again, or not, sorry, unnormal bread, or non-sourdough bread again. So can you go into that in a bit more detail?
So all plants that are grown out in the environment are covered naturally in yeasts and bacteria. So wild yeast and wild bacteria, mainly lactobacilli, which are the same bacteria that are also used for fermenting milk. They just naturally occur everywhere in the environment. And when you break the plant material down, in case of a vegetable or something that contains a lot of water, and you bring the content of the cells, which is sugary contents and proteins and that, to come in contact with the water and the bacteria start fermenting. They eat and metabolize the sugars and proteins and whatever comes out of those plant materials. In the case of grains for bread, obviously there's very little water in the grains, which made grains like the thing that humans first started growing and trading, because you can dry them for a lot and store them for a long time and trade them that way. But in the case of sourdough, so you need to make the flour or break the grain open, and then you need to add water again. But that is basically enough. The natural bacteria and yeasts on the grains will then start fermenting the starches and the cellulose and the proteins that are in the grain. And because it is... there are lots of different bacteria and lots of different wild yeast from different strains, and they all have slightly different metabolic profiles, meaning they all do something slightly different, and then they do something with the stuff that the other bacteria have done as well. So In the most important one is they break down cellulose, which is the structural part of plants that we cannot digest at all. Like, we don't have the right enzymes to break that down. That helps. So if you eat a normal, say normal in a sense of a, you know, not sour fermented wholemeal bread, it's likely to give you more indigestion because those cellulose strands haven't been broken down. But because you have lots of bacteria in your own gut, they will then start breaking it down once the cellulose gets there, and that will give you, you know, that's when people say, oh, I get bloated. You know.
And is that obviously the thing with bread? The you know, the headline is always about gluten and gluten intolerance. Is it the same concept?
Yeah, so gluten is a protein. It is very dominant in wheat, and modern wheat varieties have been bred to contain particularly high contents of gluten, because gluten, the proteins make kind of like a helix structure, like when they connect. So when the flour gets mixed with water, the proteins connect. And because they are a helix, they make then sort of a three-dimensional network that grows through the dough. And because they are a helix, they're like a little spring, so they're stretchy. And that's what gives bread elasticity. And because the modern wheat varieties are bred to have quite a high gluten content that can upset people, but also there's actually quite a bit of evidence that the modern wheat varieties have also been introduced. They've introduced other proteins as well to assist in bulk up the protein content, and that a lot of people who react and think they react to gluten are actually reacting to those introduced proteins that weren't originally in wheat, and that older wheat varieties are a lot better tolerated. But there's also another thing with gluten. So these proteins, they have like little side arms that come off the helix. And these little side arms in the sourdough fermentation, from the acid of the bacteria that gets produced, they kind of get eaten away from that helix structure. So what stays is the helix, so the elasticity stays, but the little side arms, which are thought to kind of rough up the interior of your gut as it passes through, so the little side arms kind of hook into the villi, which are the very fine filaments that sort of stick into your gut through which you absorb food. So that's sort of at the interaction point where your gut absorbs nutrients. The villi are very essential to that, and it's thought that these little side arms of the gluten interact or hook into the villi and kind of cause these micro abrasions, like tiny little wounds. And then because there's this tiny little wound, you kind of like microbleeding, and it's also a point for bacteria to then infect you, and that can cause, you know, localized small points of infection, which then the immune system tries to fight. And so you get this reaction of the immune system going, oh, there's a problem there, there's an infection, and then the immune system, in extreme cases of people with celiac disease, causes the villi to retreat, and that causes in celiacs huge problems, because then they can't absorb nutrients anymore, or not properly. And that's what a lot of people who have really severe celiac disease get found. They lose their villi and they have problems absorbing enough nutrients. Most people, however, are not celiac. Most people have a problem with the fact that the wheat is so highly, you know, high in protein, and especially bred for that. Modern wheat is also extremely, there's a lot of chemicals that get used in wheat growing. So on the field, the farmers spray a lot of different chemicals, and most prominent, they do spray glyphosate just before harvesting, because glyphosate dries out the kernel, and that gets sprayed 2 or 3 days before harvesting. And then the idea is, obviously, you harvest before you get another lot of rain on the grains, so they're nice and dry. So you have got a nice coating of glyphosate on there as well. And then normal bread is a very quick fermented product. So Well, sourdough is a process that happens slowly. Generally, sort of 18 to 24 hours is what a good sourdough takes to ferment. The modern supermarket bread varieties, they are basically less than 2 hours. So they use a super tuned yeast. They put sugar in there, and the yeast, and so sourdoughs always have yeast in them as well. We often get questioned, people come into the shop and go, can I have a yeast-free bread? And I say, well, you don't do yeast-free bread. All breads contain yeast. But sourdough, so normal modern supermarket bread is just leavened with yeast. So the yeast at some point got identified as the organism that eats the sugar, not the cellulose, not the complex stuff, and it produces the most CO2. And CO2 obviously is the gas that bubbles up and leavens the dough. So if you can, increase the yeast content and increase the CO2 in your mixture, and it works really, really fast, then the bread leavens really fast and you can bake it really quickly. So that, for big bread factories, the sourdough process is slow. You have to make the bread and then you have to put it somewhere for 24 hours and you have to come back to it. And that's a lot more complicated than just getting your order and baking your bread and 2 hours later packing it and sending it out the door. So when that process got refined, it's called the Chorleywood process. That's the process of fast bread baking and adding a few additives like sugar and some hard fats and some dough stabilizers that allow the gluten to be stretched even further, so you get a bigger volume on the loaf. That's when basically, mainly in the Anglo-Saxon world, in the 60s and 70s, the sliced bread revolution, where the best thing came about, and you ended up with something that is very light and fluffy and sweet and sugary and addictive, but has zero nutritional value.
And that's why they go for, what is it, the cost of white loaf of bread these days? I would never buy it. What is it, $1?
No, I think about $2 or something. Yeah. But yeah, when I look at that and I look at what my cost is to make a loaf of bread, I just can't understand how this is possible. And I guess recently I've tried to understand the system a bit more, because I really wanted to get into supermarkets and felt like I really would like sourdough bread to stop being like an elitist, niche kind of thing that you only do occasionally on the weekend. I would like it to be something that people eat every day, because that's what we used to do. People ate sourdough bread all the time. And, guess what? Until the 1940s, everything was organic, because we didn't use synthetic fertilizer until after the Second World War. That's
a great point.
People used to eat a lot of bread, and but the bread was all wholemeal, and it was all sourdough, and it was all really healthy. And stripping the wholemeal and the sourdough away from it and adding chemicals and hard fats, and that has turned bread into something frankly quite toxic. You can live off wholemeal sourdough and water almost indefinitely, but if you try to live off white fluff tip-top bread and water for I don't think it would take you much longer than a couple of weeks or so before you end up feeling really, really bad, and probably want to go to hospital and go like, there's something wrong with me. So I would really like for sourdough bread to be more accessible and more commonplace, and also maybe a little bit cheaper, because the way we make it, our biggest cost is labor, because it is very labor intensive, and but bread becomes cheaper the more you make of it, because in a sourdough process, it takes exactly the same amount of time, more or less, to make 10 loaves of bread as it does to make 100 loaves of bread. The only difference is that in the end, like the cutting out and shaping, which doesn't take that long. The long parts of it are the you know, the dough making and the fermenting of the starter, and then the dough making again, and then the fermenting of that dough, and then the shaping is relatively quick, and then it needs to leaven, and then it needs to bake, and all those times are exactly the same, whether it's 10 or 100 loaves. But it's getting that volume that is difficult. So
I just, listening to your talk, I just can't help but cringe at the thought of how many obese children we have in New Zealand, and you know, with diabetes and other diet-related illnesses. And then, you know, you go to the supermarket, and so many parents in New Zealand who are struggling to get by will load up their supermarket trolley with bread, cheap white so-called bread, because it's $1 or $2 a thing, and you know, that's the kids are munching away on that. And it's just, in listening to you explain all that sort of microbiology and gut biology and the connections with the bread or the wheat grain and the gluten thing. Oh, it's just you feel like yelling at them to stop, you know, but they're trying their best, right? They don't know this. They just see the price, I imagine.
A lot of people don't know this, and it's not just poor people who don't know it. It's a lot of people who don't know, you know, what goes into our food and how it's made, and how the whole food system works. You know, how much money ends up in the distribution chain in the middle parts, and how little the producers get. And for food to be as cheap as, you know, $2 for a loaf of bread, there is nothing. There can't be anything good in there. It can't be, because if you do the maths, and if you know how much money the supermarkets and the distribution chain takes out of that, there's very, very little in there that actually is of nutritional value, that, you know, that would be any good. And New Zealand is particularly difficult, I think, because there's only two players in the supermarket realm, and they've got the market sewn up between them. Their margins are huge. I've recently tried to get in there, and, you know, for the bread category, the margins are about 45% what the supermarket takes. And then there's another probably 15% to 20% that you have to pay to a merchandiser. So that's a company that actually goes into the supermarket and puts the stuff from the warehouse onto the shelf, because the supermarkets don't actually do anything. They just, all they give you is the option to sell, but they don't actually do anything. So you have to, and then you have to add, you know, 5 to 10% distribution costs. So you have to pay a courier to get it to the store. You have to get somebody in the store that takes it from the back to the front and makes sure it's actually on the shelf and for sale. And then the supermarket itself. So that's, you know, 75% of the retail price that doesn't go to the producer of the food.
All right. And I remember you telling me too that something like the bread that you don't sell, you have to...
Oh, yeah, that comes on top of it. So all the bread that you don't sell, you have to credit. So that's about 15% for bread as well.
It's just brutal.
It's absolutely brutal, and it's near impossible for smaller producers, especially of a short shelf life product like bread, that, you know, basically... I mean, nobody wants to buy a loaf of bread that's already 2 days old. And either you have to put in chemicals, so a loaf of bread can easily be 5 weeks old and still be fresh, or you have to cop like these ridiculous returns, and it's just...
And I was just thinking too that I know that just another bit of research has come out recently to confirm that bread is the #1 wasted food in New Zealand.
Yeah, absolutely.
We waste a huge amount. I think it's roughly 40% of our food.
And that's why I always say it's actually a good loaf of sourdough is actually not that much more expensive than, like, I mean, obviously it's more expensive than, say, you know, the $1.50 or $2 loaf. But, you know, if you're thinking you're buying good bread and you're buying something like Vogel's or Freya's or Plowman's or something, you know, these loaves are sort of in the $4.50, $5 range. But most people buy bread every time they go to the supermarket. They don't even think about it, and they come home and they find they've got a third of a loaf still in the bin or in the cupboard. So then
Nice.
it gets chucked out, because who wants to eat, you know, 3-day-old bread when you've got a fresh loaf?
And just all the wasted.
And so actually they end up paying, you know, a third more for their loaf of bread,
right? Yeah,
because they're always throwing out so much. So then they're paying, you know, instead of $4.50, they're actually paying something like $6.50, and you know, you can actually already, like, even in a bakery like ours, where we use organic ingredients, we're really at the upper end of the price scale. We sell bread loaves for, you know, between $4 and $10. And then if you consider that of a true wholemeal sourdough, you won't actually eat that much, because if you eat a slice of that bread, you feel really full, because it's really nutritious.
Yeah, we get a loaf of your bread pretty much every week, and it lasts probably 3 or 4 days, depending how hungry you are. But just goes.
So there you go. You buy 2 loaves of bread, and you know may spend $7.50 or $8 on a loaf of bread. So in the week you spend $16 on it, or $15 on your bread. While with other bread you buy maybe, you know, would buy 4 or 5 loaves of bread, and you'd be actually spending more and getting less.
And being a sustainability consultant, I can't help but think about all the other costs in that as well. So sure, there's the money cost, but there's all those emissions costs and all those resource costs that are going into making that quote unquote bread, and then it's just getting chucked into a landfill where it's creating methane and da 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 da.
I've tried very hard to find food rescue companies or organisations that would take our waste bread, and it's nearly impossible. For quite some time we had Mission, the Auckland City Mission, taking our bread, but they eventually said, look, we're inundated with bread, we can't take your bread, and your bread isn't sliced, and our clientele isn't interested in sourdough, so it's just too much.
Is sliced a big thing as well?
Oh yes, for New Zealanders, yes. Yeah. And and then I tried to find somebody else, and you know, it was every organisation, from the Salvation Army to Kiwi Harvest to whatever. Everybody said, "Oh no, sorry, we just can't take any bread. Like, it's too much."
Because they've got so
too much bread, because the supermarket's wasting 15% of their bread every day. So you know that. If you go to the supermarket, you've got a whole aisle full of bread. If you think 15% of that goes into the bin every day, that's quite a lot.
Just makes me, I can't help but start, pull parallels with other issues that supermarkets are causing. One that's jumping to mind is plastics. Your bread, when you go to the bakery, it either comes in a paper bag, or we take our own reusable bread bag there. It's all plastic packaged bread, and you look at the business model of a supermarket. It's to flatten a big piece of land, put a big piece of concrete down, put up a big shed, create a whole lot of car parks, and then put up shelves inside that shed and just say to the food producers, there you go, up to you. We bring all the people in, you have to keep your food up on those shelves. And they're forced to use plastic, and they're forced to get people to go in there all the time, and they're forced to put chemicals and stuff in there to make it last on the shelf. And they're forced to drive prices down and down and down. I think there's a lot to be said about the model of a supermarket and the impacts they're having on us socially and environmentally, right? I think for those listening, if you're not already, probably most people here are, but buying bread from your local baker is a very good thing to do, or one of the kind of key staples. I think eggs, I think milk, I think bread, these things that you can buy from your local farmer's market and from your local bakery. Because the more I've learned, especially from you, Isabella, around the bread industry and alongside the supermarket industry is, I don't know, not something I want to support.
Yeah.
Hey, well, I just want to look at my questions here. I was going to ask you. We got started. We haven't even had to look at them at all. So I've got a question here to sort of touch into your science expertise and around your microbiology. Can you talk to us a bit about the connection between gut biology and soil biology? Because you've talked a bit about the plants and especially wheat and the impact that has on your gut. But can we sort of link that back into soil? Because such a big topic again around sustainability, around environmental issues, around climate change is soil, and us really awakening, I think, to the fact that it's, basically the soil is the gut for a plant, right? It's kind of how I
Well,
explain it to
that's what
people.
I always say. The soil is the gut of the
You
planet.
probably said it to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm claiming
Yeah,
it now.
no. I mean, the role of bacteria is to break things down. That's what they do. You know, they take matter in all sorts of forms and they break it down into simpler components and make it available for other life forms to then use in different ways. And that happens everywhere and on every surface, and that happens in your gut, and that happens in the soil. So in the soil, you've got really complex systems where bacteria and fungi live in symbiosis and symbiotic relationships where they benefit from each other. And what is something that really has sort of come to the fore in just the last few years is the understanding of the microbiology the microbiology in the soil and the complex systems that exist there. And again, that's because the DNA technology now is so cheap and available that they can do like these huge samples where they take, you know, a sample of soil and they can run sequencing and they can see how many different strains and groups of bacteria live in there and how many different groups of fungi live in there and how they interact with each other. And they can show that in agriculturally depleted soils where a lot of farming chemicals have been used, these networks of bacteria and fungi disappear. And you can actually see that. Like if you go to, my sister, she's an organic farmer, and when she once demonstrated that to me, like very vividly, on one of her fields on the other side of the track, there's a non-organic farm, and they use sprays and everything. So she showed me, she's like, look, she dug into the soil on her side and picked up a little bit of soil, and it's like a clumpy, dark brown, you know, moist matter. And there's some worms in there, and, you know, it's sort of got this sort of three-dimensional texture. And then on the other side of the track, literally, you know, 2 meters other side, it was a cornfield. So first straight rows of corn. You can look under the corn all the way almost to the other side of the field. You know, there's nothing growing under the corn, and the soil is grey and hard. It's just a physical texture. There's no life in there. That's all been stripped away because the chemicals that you pour on there kill the microbiology in the soil. And the sad thing, I think, is that so many farmers are trapped in this system because initially what happened, you know, when the first synthetic fertilizer started getting applied onto crops, obviously, you know, when you start on the first time, the land is organic. You know, the microbiology in the soil is maybe not 100% intact, but it's certainly not disturbed to the way that it is now for a lot of agricultural soils. So initially, when you go into virgin land, the first crops that grow with synthetic fertilizer are amazing because the plant has the natural fertilization and biology in the soil to draw on, and then it gets like this absolute boost of nitrogen and potassium, and you get like these amazing plants. But what happens is the nitrogen and the potassium and what is supplied in the synthetic fertilizer makes the plant just take that, and it doesn't work with the networks in the soil that it normally works with, because what normally happens is that the plant through photosynthesis makes sugars, and that, you know, the sugars then get used for all sorts of things, to make grains or fruit or vegetables or leaves or whatever. But the excess sugars, the plant actually feeds back through the roots into the soil, and it feeds the fungi. And the fungi and bacteria, they live off those sugars, and they make a huge network, which then brings other nutrients like nitrogen and potassium, but also water, to the plant. So the roots of the plant actually don't fully describe the perimeter to which the plant has access to water, because the fungi work together with the plant and they bring water from further afield to the plant through this huge network. And what happens is with the synthetic fertilizers and artificial chemicals, and especially fungicides and all of that, they kill those networks, and they kill those micro organisms. And then after a few years of using them, the farmer will notice that their yields will go back, because the plant now doesn't have the excess of the healthy soil anymore, and they will need to use more and more synthetic fertilizer to get the same results as they had initially, which, you know, destroys the soil even more. The soil doesn't hold water anymore, so they need to irrigate more. The heavy irrigation then washes away what is still left of topsoil, to the point that they now reckon we've only got about 40 harvests left on this planet, in some areas even less, because then all the topsoil will have disappeared. And what do we do then? You know, I mean, people then go, oh, well, we'll just grow, you know, hydroponics. Really? Really? I just find that so staggering, that people think, I think it's pure hubris to think that we can exist without other life forms on this planet, that we can exist in a lab environment, in just hydroponics, and you know, go and live on Mars or something. We can't even make this planet work. How are we going to live on a different planet that's completely hostile and you know, has nothing of the basis that we need for life there, and here we're destroying everything. It's why don't we just stop destroying things and understand how the planet works and work with nature rather than against it?
And you know what, Isabel, like, one of the things that I love about learning about this stuff is it's so interesting, it's so fascinating. Like, this is stuff that, you know, especially, I guess, native populations around the world are like now looking at Westerners and going, we've been telling you all this time. But there's so much fascinating stuff to learn about how the real world interacts. You know, how that soil biology you're just talking about, the interaction between the plants and their different, with the I'm trying to think of the words now, the soil, fungi, and like it's just so fascinating. Instead of, like, you know, the other way, just thinking, oh well, need more nitrogen on the soil, spray nitrogen on, job done. Like, that's just so boring. Like, what are you learning about there?
It's such a reductive way of working, and I think that is one of the key problems with our system. You know, that we well, everything is commercialized. You know, you need to be able to make money out of it, and to be able to make money out of something, you need to patent it, and you have to have a product that you can sell, and so the system naturally tries to reduce everything to a single thing that you can patent and put a fence around and you know, put in a package and sell. And our system, because that is our economic system, you know, it rewards people who do that well and who can sell a product, and they can then dominate things. And in food globally, you know, there's very few food companies who really dominate things. You know, they're huge international food companies.
5 or so, I think, they dominate 80%. Don't quote me on that, check that, but something like that kind of figure, I know. It's I said something like 5 companies have like 80%, dominate about 80% of the world's food, something like that.
Yeah, it's insane. And the other thing is also that I always find that sort of, like, I don't know, it's almost conspiracy theory, like, although I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but if you look at what goes into food, like the companies that produce the agrochemicals, like Monsanto, they hold seed patents for seeds that only work with a certain chemical, or that work very well with a certain chemical. So Monsanto sells these glyphosate resistant seeds. So you can grow soy and corn and wheat and whatever, and everything, you spray glyphosate, everything on the field dies but your plant, because it's got the resistance gene in it. And obviously that's, you know, that's been their big seller. So they have the seeds, they sell you the chemicals that you spray on it, then that crop gets processed into a highly processed food. So, you know, the highly processed foods contain mainly soy, corn, wheat, and rice as sort of the main crops, you know, that a lot of processed food, you know, I don't know, I can't put a percentage on it, but a high percentage of ingredients in there is made from very few ingredients. And then you add a whole lot of chemicals, synthetic flavors and artificial colors and, you know, aromatics and preservatives and emulsifiers. Guess what? They're also made by the same companies. And then if you consume this stuff for a lifetime, and, you know, around about your, you know, when you sort of come to middle age, you start feeling the effects of it. Oh, well, hey, we can sell you a whole lot of drugs that can keep you going for a bit longer. Guess what? They're also made by the same companies. So from their perspective, it's, you know, it's a very good business model.
It is.
Hold them on that, you know. If you're a shareholder, why would you disagree with that? But it's not, you know, it's not beneficial for our health or for the planet's health.
Well, to me, it just shows the example, what I sort of keep saying to a lot of people, you know, like this economic system that we've inherited, the people who created it did not understand a thing about microbiology, or a thing about how the real world works, or a thing about climate change, or a thing about carbon cycles. They didn't know any of that. So they came up with this system of how to trade and how to do business. And it was, you know, what we know as now as capitalism, and then neoliberalism. And it continued. They just got so powerful as well, these businesses, that they can then start to influence the political system, that then can start to, you know, influence laws and stuff. And you see that especially in the States, right? And you just look at what's going on there and how much those massive food businesses influence the law and legislation. And what we talk about again in sustainability is externalities, right? So the costs that businesses don't have to put into their products. So coming back to you talking about how cheap the bread is, they are having all these impacts in terms of on the soil. Like you talked about your sister's land and beautiful soil and the grey, dead soil on the other side. And then you talked about the wash off as well going into our rivers. And we know what's happening around the world, around the state of rivers, but it's very big here, obviously, in New Zealand. Those businesses don't have to pay for those impacts. They don't have to pay for those to be cleaned up. They don't have to pay for that excess Roundup to be collected in somehow. They don't have to pay for that soil that's been lost. And so they are creating this product, this bread, this dollars, that's creating all sorts of, you know, horrific stats around childhood diabetes and other health-related issues from what they're eating. And they're not having to pay the true cost of what they're producing, you know. And here's someone like yourself who's trying hard to pay that through organic, you know, producing organic food, and you have to pay more not to pollute, and you have to pay more to pay people well to do the labour, and it's hard. It's hard to compete when you are, I guess, producing food in harmony really with how the real world works, right, and with some level of morals and ethics around the health of your customers as well.
Yeah, it's not the best way to make a lot of money.
Yeah, anyway, that's my big rant. Hey, anybody who's on there listening, feel free to answer away some questions while we've got Isabel here. We'll probably go for about another 10 minutes or so. So if you want to find out about bread or microbiology or soil biology, organics, now's a great opportunity to reach out. So what I thought we'd do next, Isabel, is go into our word association game, which I warned you about. So I'm going to say a word to you, a thing or an object, and you're going to say back to me the first word that comes into your head. Okay. If you really want to, you can say pass.
Okay.
As I said to you before, I won't judge you, but I will judge you. But you can say pass if you don't want to. Okay. You ready?
Yep.
Bread.
Butter.
Organic.
Soil.
Science.
Knowledge.
Supermarkets. Good.
Yeah, no.
That's a good word. That's a good word. This is saving all languages too, that one. Soil. Come on.
Nutrition.
Okay. Fossil fuels. You're slowing up a bit here.
Yeah, sorry. Climate change.
New Zealand.
Green, not so clean.
Few too many words, but okay. Germany.
Anal. Good things and bad things about being anal. Germany has done both.
No, that's great. That's great. That is great. Thank you. Cannabis.
Sorry, what?
Cannabis.
Legalize.
Politics.
Tripwires.
Euthanasia.
Oh, probably necessary.
And the last one, religion.
History.
Yeah, good. Good. Hey, well, we've got some other questions here that we ask everyone. These are not your quick fire one word ones. I still can't believe you said anal, but that's amazing. So I'm going to ask you some of these, and we'll see how we go for the next, say, 5 minutes, and just give anybody else opportunity to ask questions coming in. I'm not going to get into that. I'm going to say, if you could go back in history and change one political, cultural, economic decision that's either happened here or New Zealand, sorry, it's either happened globally or here in New Zealand, what would it be?
Oh dear. I think the I don't know if I can explain it very well, but the way that we pay, or that our political systems are, that politicians are basically career politicians.
Right.
There was a very good movie that I once watched not that long ago, where after the 2008 financial crisis in Iceland, they tried to implement a different political system where
Yes.
where they tried to kind of have like a jury, like people who would be basically drawn out of a hat to act kind of like a second parliament to the political normal elected parliament, that would ratify all the decisions that politicians made, and these people would just be like a jury, just anyone from the street. They would get paid for a year. They couldn't make a career out of it. Their job was just to make the best decisions for the people. And I think something like that, if something like that could be implemented, and that there was a point in time where I think in the US, when they were considering the Constitution in the US, where they tried to figure out what is the best way to structure a political system, they were considering something similar. But I think if we had some kind of corrective doorstop system to stop career politicians from making decisions that benefit them personally, or their party politics, and we're able to make decisions more based on expert advice and science and best knowledge of the time. I mean, you can never have absolute knowledge, and there's always things that you don't know at a time that you're going to have to revise later. But I think there is too much careering and looking after one's own going on in politics, and that stops us in coming to better systems.
Yeah, good. Okay, what's one thing about what you're trying to achieve that really frustrates you? Just one thing.
Yeah, the difficulty in actually getting people to be really interested and to actually act on what they kind of already know. People have heard a lot of things about, climate change, and all sorts of topics about good food and nutrition and what they should be doing. And I feel a lot of people are just not doing it. They're just using the easy way out, and I struggle with that. I try myself. I try very hard, and I know you do as well. And some people do, and I think a lot of people. And it's not necessarily about money and poverty. There's a lot of people where we live. I live in Mount Eden. And you go. It's not money. It's not knowing what's stopping you. That I find that incredibly frustrating.
I just makes me think. I used to be a fitness trainer, right? And I would always say to people, like, if you're going to spend your money on anything, spend it on what you put in your body. Like, surely food, you want to spend and get the best quality stuff going into your body. So surely that's a good place to start. Is spend your money on good food.
I mean, what I always say is the cells, your body is made of molecules, and those molecules are made from the food you eat. You are literally what you eat. That's where that comes from. So if you eat rubbish, that's what ends up making up your body, and you shouldn't be surprised if you get sick.
Yeah, and to that point, Isabel, a plant is what it eats, right? So bringing it back to the soil.
Same. Yes, I mean we are animals, humans. We're very brainy, very evolved animals, and there's certainly some degree of the whole consciousness thing is certainly something that I can't answer, and that I haven't found anyone who could answer where that came from, and how that it is to be explained. But our bodies are just animal bodies. We're just like any other animal on this planet, and we depend on all the other animals on the planet and all the other plants and fungi and bacteria, just like everybody else does. It's a very, very complex system that we're only starting to scratch the surface of and try and we still haven't really understood it. And I think that's one of the things that is sort of problematic with science as well. I don't know any better system, and science certainly seems to be getting to a lot of answers. I'm not disputing that, but science is very reductionist. Like to study something in science,
simple things,
you can only ever study one thing at a time, and that's because if you're trying to find out something and you don't know anything about it, you can only study one factor at a time, and then try and deduct from there what that does. So you have a theory and you test one thing at a time, and you can rule out things. You can't study 20 things at once. It's too complex. You don't know what's influencing what. So that has led to this reductionist system as well, which I think also feeds into our political and economic system. That scientific view of the world has led to this reductionist view. But the simple fact is that the planet isn't like that. Everything is an interaction with everything else, and that makes it really difficult to study it from a scientific point of view. But that's something that we really need to get better at understanding. And I guess it helps that we now have computers that are really powerful and can process huge amounts of data, which we haven't been able to do before. But that is, I think, something that science needs to focus on a lot more, being more interdisciplinary, working together with different people, different researchers from different fields, and connecting all those dots and drawing those webs out, so you get a better understanding of that.
Okay, one more question from me, and then I've got two questions from the audience to finish off with. What is something that you have changed or given up in your own life that you found really hard to do?
Coffee. I used to get lots of headaches, and I'm a headache prone person, and I eventually gave up coffee and realized that made a huge difference. So I guess I haven't fully given it up, because I still drink decaf, and but it's sort of I don't know. I don't find giving, like, I'm not, like, I don't do exclusion food things. I
Yeah.
don't do that well at all. I'm very
Yeah,
bad
no,
at it. And
don't like following rules.
no, I've got I don't have the best self-control, I guess. I have a very sweet tooth. I'm not somebody who just eats healthy food. I mean, I eat healthy food 90% of the time, but I do need a sweet treat.
Yeah, it always makes me think of
In the afternoon.
the all black nutritionists used to famously give them the 80-20 rule. So 80% of the time
Yeah.
do right and eat good food, but 20% of the time,
Yeah, that's sort of what I do as well. Yeah,
good.
and to compensate that, I like exercising, so I run and I cycle, and you know I would never be able to starve myself into something. I just don't have the
Yeah. Okay, I've got these questions now. So one from Tim. Hey, Tim. What makes you hopeful for the future of New Zealand food? Good one. And so Tim's very connected in the community food growing space as well. He's doing some fantastic work in around, urban food growing and urban composting.
Yeah, I mean,
Not to lead the
the
witness.
reason I've always really enjoyed, despite all the hard work, being in New Zealand and working in New Zealand is because I think New Zealand has a fantastic sort of culture of we can do this. We don't have to follow the rules. There isn't a 500-year history of doing things a certain way. And New Zealand is small and nimble and adaptive, and people are young and look out to the world. And New Zealand is an English-speaking country, so it's well connected with the rest of the world, and things come in and things go out. And I think New Zealand has a huge opportunity to be a leader in the world of food. We're an agricultural country, and we are very, industrialized food production in New Zealand. But I think if we can turn this around and show the world, hey, this can be done differently, and we can produce better and more nutritious food that is better for the people and the planet, there's a huge opportunity in that. And I think, it's still early days, but there are more and more farmers being interested in regenerative agriculture and looking at that from a different way, and not wanting to do the chemical stuff anymore because they can see how bad it is. And I think what New Zealand is really good at is sort of taking these things on board and running with them, and really seeing opportunities. And I think, with having a young female, prime minister who, even if nobody ever agrees with everything, somebody does, and I don't agree with everything, but I think she really does listen to advice, and she genuinely seems to want to do the right thing. So I'm very hopeful that with her in power, we have a good chance of changing things, because she doesn't represent the old guard. She doesn't represent the we've always done it this way. She's clearly demonstrated that she can do things her way. So I think
to that point, just quickly on Jacinda, she did give a speech. Was it at the UN or somewhere overseas? Wasn't it about New Zealand being a world leader in sustainable farming? I can't remember exactly the words she used, but
she did say that, and I thought we need to hold her accountable to that. That she did say that, and I think she probably would like to do that, but I think we also have to acknowledge that the industrial farming complex in New Zealand is also very powerful, and it has huge interest in this happening. So it's a hard fight.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. And in from Regan. Hey, Regan. What is your favourite bread product right now?
You mean my favourite bread?
Well, he said favourite bread product. So I don't know. Yeah, your favourite bread, maybe that.
I mean, one thing I love about bread is that it is so versatile, that is so variable, that you can, like, from just flour and water, you can actually create so many different types of bread. And I think one of the beautiful things about bread is that you can use it in so many different applications, and there are different ones. My favorite, and that shows me being German, is a really dark rye bread.
Right, yeah.
You only need one slice of bread, and it's more fiber than you can get into any other food at the same density. And you eat one slice of bread with that, bit of cheese and vegetables. I like sauerkraut on bread.
What's the weirdest thing you've eaten with bread? Like, I don't know.
A straight bar of chocolate on it.
Really?
I used to eat that as a child. No, I know. In Germany, they used to sell at our school tuck shop. They used to sell buns with these fluffy marshmallow pop things in the middle. So you got like a white bun with a fluffy marshmallow pop.
Oh, you made me think when I went to school in Timaru, and there's a fish and chip shop near my school, and they sell this thing, they're called raspberry surprises, I think, and there was 2 bits of white bread. It was like a sandwich machine, how you make cheese sandwiches like this together. They would do that, but with jam in the middle, and then they would fry it, and then they would cover it in cinnamon and sugar. So good.
I don't know about it's fried, but I don't think it's much worse than what we had.
Hey, well, Isabel, thank you so much for your time. You're a very busy woman, and I really appreciate you coming on and chatting. We've had many good conversations over the last few years, and I really wanted other people to be able to tap into your knowledge. And it's just, we've only scratched the surface. I know there's so much more we could dive into, but I don't want people's phones to go flat from listening to us for too long. Is there any way like people can reach out to you or follow? Obviously, your bakery is bread and butter.
And I have a blog called Bread Politics,
yes.
Although I have been very negligent of it in the last COVID period.
That's good. We'll forgive you.
It's been very difficult running a hospitality business with some 60 staff or so in the last 3 or 4 months, and now we are here again. We didn't even talk about that, did we?
No, we didn't.
Maybe for the better.
Yes.
But I'm actually hoping to get something up again soon. But if people sort of want to understand a little bit more, I've written quite extensively about most of the things we've talked about on the blog. So there's some good resources if people want to dig into, the microbiology, the gut biology, the nutrition of bread, organics, and all of that. So that's on breadpolitics.com.
Fantastic. Oh, well, thank you so much, Isabel, and I look forward to
having me. That was fun.
No, my pleasure. I look forward to talking with you again over some bread in the bakery sometime soon.
Anytime.
Take care. See you, everybody.
Yeah.
Take care. Bye.